Hi, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Good.
Good. Good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Amazing. Before we even get started, do you want to take a second and introduce yourself to the HTIC community?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people I've met for sure, but I'm Carly Joseph. I offer a surrogacy concierge service, so I help intended parents match with surrogates, and I'm also a parent through surrogacy myself.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be here and to share with us today. I know that this is something that is at top of mind for a lot of us in the HTQA community. We just launched our own support group and a resource that we know is so needed in the broader community as well as in the HTQA community and specifically. And so we're just excited and honored to have you here to share a little bit. Would you mind if we started first with your personal experience before we speak about your professional experience in this space?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and happy to be sharing. I think the more stories that are out there and people talking about their own experiences, the better for everyone. So I'm so happy to share. As I mentioned, I am a parent through surrogacy myself twice. And so I had a very, very challenging, many years long fertility journey trying to get pregnant myself. I had endometriosis, I had surgeries, all the things, 8 egg retrievals, and it was not working. And so we decided to work with a gestational carrier. And unfortunately, once we were matched with our amazing surrogate who did ultimately deliver my son, she miscarried after the first 2 transfers. And so after facing more challenges in surrogacy, we actually decided to bring on another surrogate, not feeling super optimistic that the third transfer would work. It did. And so my son, James, is now almost 11 months old. And while our surrogate was pregnant with him, we did go ahead and do a transfer to our other surrogate, and that worked as well. However, my daughter, Mia, who was supposed to arrive about 5.5 months after my son, decided to make her entrance at 34 weeks. So they are exactly 17 weeks apart to the day.
Wow.
And so she's almost 7 months old now.
Wow. So you have your hands very full.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing. So in your experience, when you started to explore what it would look like to pivot from what you had begun with your retrievals and transfers,
Mhm.
to contemplate what it would look like to use a gestational carrier. What are some of the pieces in that transition that you found, whether it was knowledge, guidance, processing through it, that you found to be most helpful that you would recommend to others as they start to begin this thought process in the transition?
Yeah, I mean, we candidly also worked with a concierge service. That was so sort of what inspired me to start this because it was so helpful for us that I felt like more people should be doing this. This is sort of the best pathway towards working with a surrogate. So that was sort of my best thing that I did in the process, the most helpful, and certainly something that I would tell other people to do. And even before I started my business, that was sort of my going piece of advice. Like, if you can do this, this is a better and more efficient way to find a surrogate and find a surrogate that, is going to be a good surrogate for you and your family. And I think the second thing I would say is to talk to an attorney early in the process. I think a lot of people are misinformed and feel that they need to wait to see what state their surrogate lives in before they pick a lawyer, and that's not true. And I think our attorney was one of the first conversations that we had with sort of providers in the space, and he helped really inform so many of the thought processes and like requirements and things that we had going into our search.
And such great advice. In terms of choosing a lawyer, what about starting right away with a lawyer? Would you recommend? Sorry, I'm going to reframe this question.
Okay. Take your
You were
time.
saying that a lot of people have this space in their mind of, I can't choose a lawyer till I know what state my my gestational carrier surrogate is going to live in. What is it about choosing a lawyer right away that actually is counter to that, in your opinion? And do you then have to switch, or are you able to stay with a lawyer within your state?
So it's a great question. I mean, it really depends on what state the surrogate is in and sort of what the laws and rules are. But I think having a consult with an attorney and kind of shopping around for an attorney early in the process, A, is helpful because then you're prepared. Then you kind of know who you want to work with when you do get to that stage.
Right.
It's a great, sounding board and sort of third party, no pun intended, in the
Yep.
process to sort of guide you because reproductive attorneys have, done these journeys, hundreds, if not thousands of times. They're incredibly well educated about all of the players in the space. And that's anything from the agencies, the doctors, what states are, a good idea to work in, which ones aren't, based on what you want to do around termination, based on how surrogacy friendly the state is, based on your specific situation. So are you a same-sex couple? Do you have donor materials? Things like that all sort of change the game. And for us, I felt like having that conversation was just a very educated and unique perspective that really helped inform so many of the things that we went into our journey with.
And that makes a lot of sense to have that ability to go in with the clarity of
Yeah.
understanding who, where, why, and how
Hmm.
of this journey. And it sounds like starting that with a lawyer is a very important place to start. We spoke a lot about logistically speaking, but I know that when we speak about an infertility journey, I kind of, in my mind, view it as a hallway with a lot of open and closed doors. And the
Definitely.
journey begins by closing a door to open another. And so, if you're comfortable going a little into the emotional experience of what it means to close the door on, I'm going to carry this pregnancy, to I'm going to find the right person, the special person who's going to carry this pregnancy for me. What are some of the um, best practices that you would share that helped you in closing that one door so that you can open this next door?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I didn't necessarily close the door uh, initially as I opened the door to surrogacy. And I say that because at the very start of our sort of pathway to matching with a surrogate, there was still a part of me that was considering trying another transfer with a different protocol. And I actually think that the process of finding our surrogate and getting to know her and loving her and having this sort of renewed sense of possibility and optimism in our journey is ultimately what helped me decide, actually, I have been through enough physically and emotionally in trying to conceive and carry a child. And I'm going to let this other person do it because they are more qualified. We all have like our strengths and weaknesses in life. And I think, I'm oversimplifying a lot, but I think that my body personally was saying, we're good. We don't want to do this and we are not capable. So stop forcing it. And I still believe to this day that like I probably could have carried if I, was willing to do another protocol, another month of Lupron, whatever it was. But I felt at peace with giving up on that, or I don't want to say giving up, like I felt at peace with like ending my efforts there and like refocusing them on the surrogacy. So I think that itself really helped. Obviously, also lots of therapy, friends, family, my husband, my puppy who's here. All of the creature comforts and supports. But really like getting to know both of our surrogates and seeing how beautiful and how much possibility there was in this journey helped me lean into it more.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, cool.
And I think that what stood out to me as you were sharing that is that healing is a journey. It doesn't start and happen in a sudden moment of I'm closing this door to open the next. It's a slightly closing and slightly opening process that over time allows one to move through and heal. And you just described it so beautifully, and something I think that so many of us can take to heart is that you don't need to be perfectly healed to continue to move on. It's a journey and a process, and I'm sure for many of us, a process that at points throughout we're going to continue to heal and need to seek that support from loved ones, therapists, and our community that we lean into. So thank you.
Of course.
Um, as you shared, you have such a unique view that most people don't have. You got to experience two surrogates at the same time. And I am sure just by nature of them being different humans, slightly varied in how you experience that. Um, would you be open to paralleling and kind of sharing a little bit about how unique this experience can be based off of whom you
Oh
move on?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, surrogates are like snowflakes, like they say, like they're not, you know, that similar, even if they are similar kind of thing. That was not very articulate, but I guess what I'm trying to say is to your point, they are human beings. So of course they're different, but every surrogacy has its own hiccups and challenges. And, I always say when I'm having a consult with someone or talking to a client now, like, expect something to go wrong. It could be minor. We hope it's minor, but like it's not going to be straightforward. And anyone who's in the throes of a fertility journey knows this all too well. Also, I think our journeys were so different, and not just because Tori and Crystal, our two surrogates, were so different and both amazing, beautiful, incredible people, but I mean, with James, my son, like the two first pregnancies were miscarriages. So we were navigating that together and changing of protocols and, dealing with high risk doctors and things like that. And then navigating a birth, which was pretty straightforward and really wonderful. And then in our second journey, it was sort of the opposite. Like the entire pregnancy was really straightforward. Like the transfer worked, everything was great. Candidly, like my husband and I were, I don't want to say less involved. Of course, we were involved, but like we were not as focused on it because we had a newborn at home. But then my surrogate was PPROM, so her water broke at 29 weeks. So the end of the pregnancy was her living in the hospital and us navigating that and talking to a NICU team and learning what to expect with like a real like severe preemie. And then as she stayed inside longer, like, okay, she's still going to be a preemie, but like what can we expect? What will her development issues be? So very, very, very unique.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And it just also the difference between even different pregnancies with the same surrogate
Yes.
can be so unique. And I think a piece that we hear a lot that is very challenging for a lot, and maybe this is something that you can both share from the personal experience and the professional experience, is it's really hard to relinquish control. And even when carrying your own pregnancy, there's very little that one controls. But even more so when it's another human carrying that pregnancy for you.
Yes.
What can you share in terms of both the experience of relinquishing some of that control, but also some advice from the professional of what one could control in that process to support oneself through it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, I mean, I'm a super type A control freak. Anyone that knows me will attest to that. And I have self-awareness about it. So I think I knew going into this that this would be an exercise in forcing myself to surrender and also like finding ways to soothe my own
Mm.
like need to control or desire to implement control where I couldn't. And I think knowing that going into it was really helpful because I could sort of say to myself or say to my husband or say to our concierge or our lawyer, like, this is a thing that I really want to be happening or I want to be involved in, and it's really frustrating, but like knowing that putting that into action maybe wouldn't be the best for the journey as a whole. And so that's kind of how I advise clients as well. It's sort of like, identify the things that you can control and try to make peace with those that you can't, the latter being the majority of the things in the journey, honestly. And I think, this comes up a lot in sort of crafting requirements for a surrogate. Like, what are the things that you're looking for? And the sort of thing that I always say to people and kind of keep repeating is, at the end of the day, this is another person. So inherently, like, of course, you can't control them and the decisions that they make. But the thing you can control is entering into a relationship with someone that you feel you can trust. And so making that decision based on a really strong feeling of trust is ultimately what I really believe leads to a smooth journey overall.
And that's such a beautiful way of framing it. Are there any exercises or tools or tips that you provide to a client and how you build that trust? Because trust obviously isn't something you meet someone and I trust you inherently. Trust is built over time. So how does one, in what is seemingly a short period of time,
Yeah.
build trust in another human to do something that, as you so eloquently just shared, is so hard to relinquish control over, and so important. The infertility journey is a lot of like rush to stop and wait.
Hurry up and wait. Yeah.
So what would you like, what are some of the tools that you implement with clients to help them to
I,
speed up that trust process building?
Yeah, I think the biggest tool is to share vulnerably, by, like, in a match call, for example, or when you're first getting to know the surrogate, like, share the things that you are anxious about or that you feel like you'll want to control, and share your anxieties in a vulnerable way. I think by modeling like openness and sharing, you are asking without asking for the other person to trust you, and that is sort of how trust is built over time. So I don't think that the trust is built like in that first match call, and that's a really big sort of challenge in this process for parents who are first jumping in and saying to me, like, how do we know that this is the right surrogate for us, just after like a 1 hour call? And it's really hard. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's not like 100% clear, but I think at the end of the day, like, the best matches are those where you kind of walk away and just kind of have a good feeling. I always compare it to dating, which, maybe is not a great analogy, but it's you kind of go on a date and you're like, well, I don't know if I really know this person or fully trust them, but like, you just sort of have a good gut feeling about it. And I think the best way to foster that is by sort of sharing and opening yourself up to them in hopes that they will do the same. And that's sort of just
Okay.
how you build the trust.
And that so eloquently stated, in terms of building that trust. But the question then lies is, okay, so I went on a first date and I'm willing to go on a second date, but I'm not agreeing to marry the person after my first date. But here I'm about to enter, after our first date, into a contract, not a marriage contract, but a carry my baby contract. What happens if that trust does not continue? What happens if after a third date, this is not the person you want to marry? Is there what is crafted into this process that allows you to say, I thought this was the right person. My gut told me this is the person to go with. But as we're crafting our contract together, I'm realizing that I'm relinquishing more than I feel comfortable relinquishing. And I don't feel like I'm being met halfway.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of small sort of catches for that in the beginning of the process. And that's anything from, financial precautions, legal precautions, and medical precautions. And, without getting into all the nitty gritty details, there are sort of different milestones along this journey in all three of those sort of venues, right? So, from a legal standpoint, you work through your contract, and then you work through the contract with your surrogate's attorney as well, or your attorney does. So, if there are misalignments, you will know about that before you're like too far along. And same idea medically and financially. Financially, you pay the agency and you pay the surrogate through an escrow account in increments. So it's designed to be protective to both parties similarly. And from a medical standpoint, your doctor will review the medical records, and then they'll also do a physical exam. So there are sort of many, many steps in the process. And over that time, you're getting to know the person, you're learning to trust them, they're learning to trust you. It's totally a two-way street, but everyone sort of has protections in place.
And so what I'm understanding from you is that part of that protection is the opportunity to say at any point in that initial phase, this is not working for me on either end of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, anyone, both parties can, of course, change their mind at any point. That's obviously not what everybody hopes for. But I think there's a lot of protection around what are the things that, would make you want to back out to
Right.
avoid that upfront. And that includes the match call, that includes going back and forth with the agency if there are, sort of reservations about the surrogate or if the surrogate has reservations about the intended parent and so on and so forth.
And something that you had shared about your own personal journey, that you went through 3 transfers before the transfer that became your son. What,
Two before that one, yeah.
right, that he
Yeah.
was the third.
He was the third.
What is common practice in terms of how many transfers would one go up to with a surrogate before moving on?
Most contracts include 3 transfers.
Okay, so that is usually the norm, and the expectation is that hopefully by one of those 3 will lead
Exactly.
to a
Yeah.
pregnancy.
And I think I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I think that statistically speaking, like I don't know. One of my doctors at one point said to me, like, everybody's allowed a failed transfer. It's just the odds are not that you always will get pregnant. It's sort of like if you conceive, you know, I don't like saying naturally because there's nothing unnatural about IVF, but like
100%. Yeah.
traditionally, if you have sex and,
Yeah.
want to conceive, you wouldn't get pregnant every month. So it's the same idea. And that's why most contracts do include up to 3 transfers. But at each juncture, you have to talk to the surrogate and the surrogate has to talk to you and agree, okay, we want to continue.
Yeah. And as you had said earlier, it's a grieving process. You lost, and I'm sure on a very deep level, a surrogate who feels connected and you've built this trust with them. They feel their sense of loss and a loss that they feel for you.
Exactly.
I'm sure that there is a lot that needs to be processed before one is emotionally and physically ready to move forward with another attempt that also, as you said, statistically speaking, can also end either hopefully in a pregnancy, but with the potential for a loss. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much. Thank you for being willing to share of your own experience and from your professional experience. I think that
Absolutely.
it's just so wonderful that this is, as you said, a topic that's being shared by individuals who've experienced it, as well as those working in this space to make sure that everyone who is even contemplating it, and especially those who are already pursuing it, have somewhere to turn, have an understanding that they're not the first, nor will they be the last, to traverse this pathway through parenthood, and that there is this community that they can lean on. So thank you for being an integral part of that community. And before we say goodbye, if you have a last nugget that you want to leave those watching with, as they either are pursuing or contemplating pursuing their own journeys.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much to say. And I mean, I guess I would just say, do your research, talk to as many, former intended parents as you can, different players in the space. Talk to me if you'd like. I offer free consults to anyone that is, interested in hearing my personal story, or about the work that I do and how I can help. And if that's something that's interesting to you, you can find me here on Instagram or at carlypjoseph.com.
Amazing. And we'll be sure to tag you so that anyone who is interested
Great.
in connecting and learning more about the wonderful work that you're doing, they can reach out directly. And thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This
Of course.
community is amazing, and I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of it.
My pleasure.
Have
Take
a
care.
nice day.